Shoji Naruto is comprised of 4 main arcs, and those arcs are the Prologue / Land of Waves arc, the Chunin Exams arc, the Konoha Crush arc, and the Sasuke Retrieval arc. And while it's hotly contested amongst Naruto fans all across the globe which of these arcs is the greatest out of these 4 original arcs, one thing that is agreed upon is that every single one of these 4 arcs has a thing that makes it special and incredible. The Land of Waves arc makes us take a step back about how we perceive antagonists and stories, and makes us understand that possibly the antagonists that we see battling against these heroes are antagonists because they were failed over and over again. The Chunin Exam arc gives us, well, an exam arc, which everybody loves, and it's finished with a power tournament arc, which also everybody loves. And it was during the Chunin Exams that we realized the level of combat that we were going to be served in this show. As during this time in Naruto, taijutsu still reigned supreme, and the choreography very much matched that vibe. In the Konoha Crush arc, we were introduced to the sheer scale and power of this universe, as we saw some of the strongest people in the show, like Orochimaru Hiruzen and Itachi, all show up to battle at the highest possible level. And in the Sasuke Retrieval arc, we saw, for really the first time ever, the Konoha 12 coming together for one mission, and that mission was to retrieve Sasuke. And thus, during this arc, we were given 6 absolutely monumental fights in which members of the Konoha 12 could have legitimately died. And thus, in the Sasuke Retrieval arc, 1, the plot of Naruto Shippuden was being built, 2, the sheer danger of the Naruto universe was revealed. Now, when people ask me which one of these 4 original arcs is my favorite, usually I answer with the Land of Waves. Is it a hipster answer? Is it contrived? Is it annoying? Maybe, but I just believe the combination of Zabuza's backstory with the building of the foundation of Naruto and Sasuke's friendship truly makes it probably the greatest arc in Naruto, point blank period. But if you were to ask me which arc contained the best fights in Naruto, my answer would be different. Because while the Land of Waves arc was a character study, exploring how antagonists can truly be broken heroes, the Chunin Exams was just children beating the hell out of each other. And as an 8-year-old at the time, watching this happen on live television and Adult Swim, that was awesome. See, because over the course of the Chunin Exams, at least in the 1v1 fights, we were served 13 individual one-on-one brawls of varying levels of importance. And while a lot of these fights were relatively quick scuffles that were very quickly won by the stronger person in the 1v1, some of these fights lasted several episodes. And not only that, but some of these fights set the basis for what the themes of Naruto would be and the character development arcs that these individual fighters would go through throughout the duration of Naruto. And thus, really, when it comes down to it, from an individual character perspective, there is no arc with such a wide-ranging effect to as many characters as possible as the Chunin Exams, and thus that the stories that we devolved into during the Chunin Exams might not have been as deep as Zabuza and Haku's. Many more people's backstories, motivations, and dreams were revealed during the Chunin Exams, and thus it is undeniably one of the most important arcs in Naruto. But today I don't want to talk about the moral or thematic importance of the Chunin Exams. No, today I want to take a look back at these fights, all 13 of them, that is, and I want to ask the question: who would win these 13 1v1s if they were fought when the individual contestants were adults? Well, adults might be a little bit misleading because some of these characters don't make it to adulthood, and thus I guess the more accurate description of today's video would be looking back at the Chunin Exams 13 1v1 fights with the strongest versions of each of the contestants in the fight. Mostly because Dosu doesn't make it to adulthood, so we saw the strongest version of him in his battle against Choji. And honestly, who knows if Zaku ever recovered from having his arms blown off. And while a lot of the hypothetical fights we're going to talk about today are going to be as one-sided as they were when they first came up in the Chunin Exams, there is a couple of very interesting and very important fights where the winner would have absolutely changed if the 2 fighters waited to fight until they were both at their strongest. And so while we're going to chug through a couple of non-important fights, stick around for the important ones, because today we're talking who would win the Chunin Exams as adults. But before we get into this rundown of hypothetical battles, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. If you like the idea of me talking about hypothetical beatdowns between imaginary characters, guys, please go and follow my other channel, The Weeb Commander, where instead of talking about Naruto and Boruto, I talk all other anime and manga. Or if you just like the idea of me talking about anime and manga, go ahead and follow my anime podcast, Otaku's Anonymous, where me and Danny Mata break down everything that happened in anime and manga this week. It's available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And if you guys want to look like you keep up with all things anime and manga, go ahead and meander on over into my merch store, otakusanonymous.net, where you can pick up some of the greatest anime t-shirts, sweatshirts, and sticker packs on demand. Before we get into all that, today we're going to talk about a brand new sponsor to the page, Upside. Upside is a free app that allows you to get cash back on daily essentials like gas, groceries, and so much more. In fact, there are over 100,000 gas stations, restaurants, and grocery stores on the Upside app, all offering you cash back on purchases you're already making. And yes, it's all real cash back. No point systems, rewards, credits, gift cards. It's all cash you can transfer directly into your bank account. I know personally, whenever I'm gassing up on a long road trip, Upside makes me feel so much better about how much gas I'm ripping through because I'm always getting money back. But how much cash are we talking here? Well, the average user of Upside earns $340 a year, which is pretty good earnings for a free app. But who knows? You could be above average. So in order to find out how much you could earn through using Upside, go ahead and click the link in my description to download Upside and use code NCHammer to earn an extra 25 cents per gallon on your first tank of gas. Top Upside earners are earning as much as $300 a month. Next, all you gotta do is claim an offer for whatever you're buying on Upside, then pay as usual as you usually would with either your debit or credit card. Follow the steps in the app and get paid. It's that simple. And it's not only that simple, it's that effective, as Upside pays people 3 times more than any other product. This includes loyalty programs and credit card rewards, all totaling up to $1 million being paid back to customers every single week. So what are you waiting for? It's about time you earned some money doing the things you already do. So out of the 13 Chunin exam fights, how many do you remember? If your answer is more than 10, that's impressive, because at least 3 of them were snooze fests. See, the Chunin exam suffered from one key flaw, and that one key flaw was Orochimaru's spies. See, Orochimaru and the Village of Sound infiltrated Konoha's Chunin exams, and because these genin coming from the Village of the Sound were definitely not genin, they made it through the test and the Force of Death rather easily, because they were competing against children. However, fortunately for us, and not so fortunately for them, their fate would shift in the 1v1 section of the Chunin exams, where almost every single one of Orochimaru's spies lost, and pretty handedly. And the first loss that was handed out to Orochimaru's spies was in the battle between Sasuke and Yoroi. Now, for those of you who don't remember Yoroi, who cares? Yoroi's claim to fame was that he had the ability to steal the strength of the person that his fist came into contact with, and thus Yoroi really was the first person we ever saw with a chakra absorption ability. It's something that would become relatively commonplace down the line in Naruto. However, the speed at which Yoroi was able to sap people's strength with his jutsu was relatively impressive, as even just glancing Sasuke's face made him weak in the knees. However, as soon as Sasuke figured out Yoroi's ability and his eyes stumbled upon Rock Lee in the crowd, Sasuke realized that the reverse lotus that Rock Lee was about to use on him prior to the 1v1 fights would be perfect in a battle against somebody whose hand has the ability to sap your strength. Get behind them. And thus Sasuke activated his Sharingan. And while the activation of his Sharingan did release the curse mark that Orochimaru put on him a couple of episodes prior, Sasuke is able to make the curse mark recede and unleashes his first ever Lion's Barrage, defeating Yoroi in a grand total of 3 minutes. It is a pretty fun fight though, but Yoroi got it way easier than he would have got it if Sasuke was an adult. Because, well, this is the last time that we ever see Yoroi, not the last time we ever see Sasuke. And what's fun is that Sasuke, at his strongest, also has a chakra absorption ability. But to assume that Sasuke would use his Rinnegan abilities against Yoroi is a stretch. If Sasuke wanted to pay back Yoroi, all he would have to do is teleport behind him, either using his Rinnegan or his FTL speed, and downspike him with a Chidori so hard that people will call him Hinata, and not the one from Naruto. But the suffering doesn't end there for the Sound Village Ninja, because the next fight we got after Sasuke versus Yoroi was Shino versus Zaku. Now, Zaku kind of started this fight at a disadvantage to begin with, because Sasuke had literally broken his arms like a day earlier, and Zaku believed that one arm was enough to battle against Shino. It wasn't, but it was a good look ahead to his future, because in the manga at least, when Zaku tries to use his wind palm against Shino and Shino's bugs, Shino's clogged up both of his palm tunnel riflings, I don't know what to call them, and in the manga it blows off one of his arms at the elbow and destroys his other. So that was probably the strongest version of Zaku, because he's now really living by the sentiment that one arm is enough. And Shino beaten Edo Tensei Tarune Aburame in a fight without using the Rinkaichu, which is by far and away the strongest bug that the Aburame have. On top of this, it was implied during the blank period, by Mitsuki at least, that Shino learned proficiency with way more bugs than even we've seen. Considering the fact that Shino was no different giant 10 Tails clones in the 4th Great Shinobi World War, it's safe to assume he would beat a one-armed Zaku again. After Shino versus Zaku, we got another real winner, because we have Kankuro versus Tsurugi. Now this fight was kind of a lose-lose situation for Orochimaru, as both Kankuro and Tsurugi were Orochimaru's spies, and they would both be involved in the Konoha Crush. But I guess in order to keep a good facade, they had to battle against each other to presumed death. Well, not death, but maiming. And while the impulse of those watching at the time was to root for Tsurugi because he was technically a Konoha shinobi, a teammate of Kabuto who was nice to Team 7 earlier, if you were rooting for Tsurugi, the fight didn't really go your way. Tsurugi's big claim to fame is that he had something known as a soft physique modification, which I just call not working out. But this was a surgical procedure that he willingly had done that allowed him to dislocate his joints and fit into any space, presumably because it made him better at the collection of intel for spy work. And thus Tsurugi was able to twist and stretch and elongate any part of his body to act kind of snake-like, which probably it should have been a pretty good indicator that he wasn't a good guy. But don't worry, because he's not around for much longer. Because even though Tsurugi wraps his body around Kankuro and appears to be choking him out, that Kankuro is a puppet. And this is actually canonically the first time we ever see a puppet in Naruto. Now Tsurugi tells Kankuro, or at least what he believes to be Kankuro, that if he doesn't forfeit, he'll break his neck. And Kankuro doesn't forfeit, so Tsurugi breaks his neck. But it's a puppet, and thus it's revealed that this puppet can also bend its arm backwards. At which point this puppet breaks every single bone in Tsurugi's body. Every single bone. I don't know if you guys have ever broken every single bone in your body, but I don't think you bounce back from that. So as adult Kankuro, who now wields sorceries puppets like the third Kazekage, the salamander, and so much more, losing to Tsurugi? No, especially when you consider the fact that after the last, Kankuro has found a way to make his chakra threads so incredibly thin that he can control his puppets from miles away. So, back to bone paste, friend. Now after that trio of irrelevance, we have our first really important fight. Though at the time, this fight embodied irrelevance as a concept. Because coming up at number 10, we have Sakura versus Ino. And wow, did this fight suck. I mean, this fight set back feminism like 2 decades. Well, that's not entirely accurate. In fact, this fight opens with some pretty cool taijutsu from both Ino and Sakura. However, the fight is weighed down in its most intense moments with flashbacks of Sakura and Ino's childhood, which is almost entirely Ino telling Sakura about how to make flower bouquets. Cause that's what girls do, especially in a world where 90% of people are ninjas. And then during this fight, when Ino gets confused as to how Sakura got this strong, and Sakura says, "You're too obsessed with your looks. I've been training too hard to think about any of that," at which point Ino just also cuts off her hair, which like I kind of forgot about because her hairstyle doesn't stay like that for long. Like she cuts the entirety of her ponytail off, and then the next time we see her, which actually isn't for a while, her hair is long again. After that, Ino feigns using the mind transfer jutsu on Sakura and actually builds a rope of hair to Sakura's leg that she uses to hold Sakura, at which point Ino actually uses mind transfer jutsu on Sakura, but Sakura resists it, so they just punch each other in the face and they both get knocked out. And thus, they are both eliminated from the Chunin exams, which is probably a good thing, because if they fought literally anybody else, they probably would have died. But that is not the case for Ino and Sakura as adults. See, both Ino and Sakura have gotten way stronger as adults. And I would say as they currently exist in Boruto is the strongest version of both of them. And while the strength that Sakura has gained has been much more outright and clear cut, recent revelations from Two Blue Vortex have made us realize that Ino might be one of the greatest sensor ninjas of all time now, as the range that she's able to hold a communication between two people mentally as a kind of Yamanaka cell phone is up to 100 kilometers or about 70 miles, which means that Ino's sensory range is at least 70 miles. Now on top of this, it's safe to assume that Ino has also learned all the other techniques of the Yamanaka clan, like mind derangement jutsu that doesn't require for the Yamanaka to leave their own body, and therefore can be used against opponents and leave the Yamanaka in the fight. But Sakura battled against Kaguya with no Hagoromo boost. Like, we need to establish the fact that Sakura was able to land a punch on Kaguya without a Hagoromo boost, and she has only gotten way stronger since then, as she's now completely unaffected by genjutsu, which one could say the mind derangement jutsu is, and was also able to go up against Anbu captains wearing falsified KCM-1 cloaks. I'm sorry, they weren't KCM-1, they were version 1 Jinchuriki cloaks. On top of that, she was able to fight Edo Tensei dragons and Sasuke Retsudan, and her chakra control is so good she can cut ninjutsu in half, and while that wouldn't be something she would have to do against Ino, she would cut Ino in half. So the winner of this one feels relatively obvious. It would not be a tie again. But Ino has come a far way. And while the battle between Ino and Sakura might have been left with no victor, the next fight we're going to talk about absolutely had a victor. And a clear-cut one, because the next chronological fight that happened was Tenten versus Temari. This is inarguably the most one-sided fight in the entirety of the Chunin exams, because at this current moment, Tenten's entire kit was relegated to things like Dragon Dive that allowed her to jump into the air, following scrolls that contained a myriad of different weapons, unsealing those scrolls, and then throwing them at her opponent. And while that would work well against children, it wouldn't work well against the greatest wind style user in Naruto, who can make wind slices so violent they can cut down entire forests and are definitely strong enough to send back some weapons. But Temari was nice enough to use her fan to give Tenten a free chiropractic adjustment, which is the kind of sportsmanship you just don't see nowadays. And while a lot of people would say that if these two were to fight again as adults, that the results would be equally as one-sided, I actually rally against that sentiment. See, because, well, yes, Tenten as an adult isn't all that formidable. In the grand scope of things, neither is Temari. See, pretty much the most impressive thing that Temari ever does from a power standpoint is when she rather effortlessly defeats Tayuya. That and when she manages to land a blow against Madara's Edo Tensei 4, using the 3 moons of her fan and her Tessen jutsu to launch back a fire attack that Madara launched at the 4th division back at Madara. And this does actually knock Madara back a fair distance. Now, does it injure him? No, it gets his armor a little dusty and he dusts it off, but at that moment Madara might have realized that he might actually need to step up his game to battle against the likes of Temari, because after that moment he activates Susanoo. Now, does this mean that Temari would stand a chance against Edo Tensei Madara? God, no. But she did land a hit, and for that, she gets props. But if Temari got strong enough to land a hit against Madara in the 4th grade Shinobi World War, how am I saying that she isn't all that much stronger? Well, because she was insanely strong as a Genin. Between releasing all 3 moons of her fan and her Sickle Weasel summon, Temari as a Genin already had the ability to cut down entire forests with her wind release. And she doesn't necessarily have a feat in Shippuden that shows us her wind release is any stronger than that. And while this is gonna sound somewhat ridiculous, Tenten may be that strong, as Tenten during the 4th grade Shinobi World War showed the fact that she's able to wield the Basho-sen, one of the treasured tools of the Sage of Six Paths, that allows the user, upon the swinging of this fan, to release a torrent of an elemental release of their choosing. And while Tenten somewhat inadvertently chooses wind release twice, the wind release that she releases through the usage of the Basho-sen is comparable to what Temari can release with the usage of her 3-moon fan. And the strength of this wind release is so powerful it's able to defeat Kakuzu's lightning mask. Now, is she only able to swing the Basho-sen twice before it uses the entirety of her chakra? Yeah, but Tenten is a natural genius for all things weapons. As it currently stands, she has 4 out of the 6 treasured tools of the Sage of Six Paths. And so, while using the Basho-sen may not be a possibility for Tenten, there's no reason for us to believe that she hasn't learned how to use the Benishago, the Kokinjo, and the Shichi Saiken. Meaning it's fair to assume that just like Kinkaku and Ginkaku, Tenten should be able to extract somebody's word soul and grab onto it with the golden canopy rope and sever it with the 7-star sword. Though the only issue with assuming that Tenten can do this is that's 3 items that you would have to wield with 2 arms. And the reason that Kinkaku and Ginkaku were able to use it together is because they had 4 arms between the 2 of them. If she placed down the Benishago and just held on to the Kokinjo and the Shiki Saiken, maybe she could figure it out, but would she last long enough to avoid Temari's wind slashes and possibly the summoning of her Sickle Weasel? Probably not, but she has a much deeper arsenal now that would make her a slightly better fight for Temari, as it was displayed in the 4th grade Shinobi World War that she's not only proficient in throwable weapons, but also handheld weapons, and that she would realize that things like shurikens and kunai are ineffective against somebody who is a master of wind release, and she would opt for using one of her handheld weapons to close the distance between her and Temari. Would she still lose? Yeah, but you know, she probably wouldn't get the chiropractic readjustment this time. After Temari versus Tenten, we have Temari's husband and his first fight in the 1v1s, and the battle of Shikamaru versus Kin. Kin? And this is the quickest fight in the entirety of the Chunin exams, clocking in at just over 2 minutes, because Kin's ability allowed her to cast Genjutsu through the sound of bells, which I guess is a foreshadowing for Shikamaru battling against women with sound-based Genjutsu. But just as Kin believes that she got Shikamaru into her Genjutsu using her bells, it's revealed that Shikamaru actually ran his shadow down the line of one of the strings that her bells was attached to and took over her body using Shadow Possession Jutsu. And like, When you're battling against somebody who controls shadows, don't throw strings at them that cast shadows. And considering the fact that Kin was one of the bodies that was used to bring Hashirama and Tobirama back to life through Edo Tensei by Orochimaru, I don't think she had a whole lot of capacity to get stronger. I'm just now remembering the other body was Zaku. So I guess he didn't have to live long wondering how one-armed life was gonna treat him. So yeah, Shikamaru, who undoubtedly gets more intelligent and more talented with his shadow control technique over the years, is absolutely beating Kin again. Though one could make the argument, and I would be here for it, that Hokage Shikamaru might actually be weaker than Chunin exam Shikamaru. But if we're talking strongest version of Shikamaru, that would be 4th grade Shinobi World War Shikamaru, and he's mopping the floor with Kin. Speaking of mopping the floor, coming up in our number 7 spot, chronologically, we got Naruto versus Kiba. Now this fight opens relatively poorly for Naruto, as the physical differences between Kiba and Naruto are apparent at this moment in time. Not to mention, Kiba has Akamaru, so Naruto is fighting a 2v1. However, the 2v1 actually rather quickly starts to begin working against Kiba, because when Naruto is able to kidnap Akamaru and then transform into Akamaru using the transformation technique, he's able to land his first hit against Kiba, pretending to be Akamaru and biting his arm. However, things don't go well for Naruto for too long, as Kiba gives a food pill to Akamaru and himself that allow them to undergo their man-beast clone technique. They then proceed to lay a barrage of hits on Naruto using their double fang destroyer, or their fang over fang technique. However, once again, Naruto decides to use the transformation technique against Kiba, turning in to a clone of Kiba. However, Kiba with his acute sense of smell is able to smell out who Naruto is and socks him in the face. However, Naruto, in the moment that he's punched, switches into a transformation of Akamaru, which leads to Kiba rocking the actual Akamaru in the face, cutting down Naruto's opponents to 1. However, the physical differences between the two of them are still relatively apparent, and one Kiba is still more than enough that Naruto can take, until eventually Kiba is about to land a decisive blow against Naruto's back, and Naruto farts in his face. And thus, Naruto wins the fight. Let me tell you what Naruto wouldn't need as an adult in this fight: any deception or flatulence. Naruto, 3 years after the 4th grade Shinobi World War, tanked a planet-busting attack. He, while riding a bike in his own light novel, Naruto Retsudan, dodged a photon laser, meaning he's faster than light. Kiba sells dog food as an influencer. Naruto could peel back the skin of Akamaru, his other dog, and Kiba live before they even realized the fight had begun. And with the extra time that it would take for their senses to realize they were kind of cold now, could sew those two pelts and a human skin into some kind of Ed Gein-esque throw rug and gift it to them before they realized the fight had begun. But that is not the case for our next fight, one of the most important fights in the entirety of the Chunin exams: Hinata versus Neji. Now, this fight had the obvious plot repercussions of Hinata being the princess of the Hyuga family, and Neji being her cousin, and yet a member of the Side family. And while Neji, at this moment in time, was a childhood genius who was much better in the Gentle Fist technique than Hinata was, Hinata still puts up a relatively impressive fight against him, even though there's a massive gap in their skill. But Neji, who's trying to prove to the world, himself and Hinata, that he's more than just his blood, puts a beatdown on Hinata. A beatdown so bad that Neji has to be stopped from basically killing Hinata. Now, is that how that fight would go between the strongest version of Hinata and the strongest version of Neji? I don't think so. See, while many can argue what the strongest version of Hinata is, I think it's rather undeniable that the strongest version of Hinata would be the last Hinata, who also happens to be the baddest version of Hinata. See, this version of Hinata has had 4 or so years to master her Twin Lion Fist, which is inarguably the strongest Hyuga technique we've ever seen. Not to mention, this version of Hinata is also given chakra by Hamura, the Otsutsuki who propagated the Otsutsuki who created the Hyuga in the first place. And thus, this version of Hinata, and possibly all versions of Hinata beyond this point, have a boost in strength comparable to what Naruto got in the 4th grade Shinobi World War. And while I don't think Hinata's genius ever reaches Neji's level of genius, she's got a lot more time to work on things than he ever did, because, you know, needle cushion. And while Neji is never necessarily seen improving as a ninja beyond the Chunin exams, Hinata absolutely is. On top of this, we know that Hinata's Byakugan is actually stronger than Neji's after his death. Well, as when Neji was able to see 800 meters in all directions, Hinata was able to do that and see multiple kilometers ahead in one direction. And if you assume that the Gentle Fist technique of War Arc Neji and the last Hinata is at least equal, Hinata being able to use the Twin Lion Fists means she wins, as the Twin Lion Fists don't change how Hinata approaches a Gentle Fist attack, because the Twin Lion Fist is essentially just Hinata coating her fist fists in chakra, while still attacking in a gentle fist technique. That is to say that she's still trying to shut down the chakra points of her opponent. However, the added bonus of the twin lion fists is that when they come into contact with her opponent's chakra, it saps their chakra and feeds her own. And since we know the gentle fist technique is largely about blocking, and therefore if Neji didn't want to have his chakra point shut down, he would have to block her strikes with his arms, would be in a perpetual cycle of either needing to dodge or would be having his chakra drained with every single punch that he blocked. So while I think in the grand scale of genius, Neji is more of a genius than Hinata, Hinata worked harder, had more time to work harder, had better techniques, and now has a boost from Hamura that almost definitely confirms that she is stronger than Neji. So Naruto would have had to battle against his future wife in the final round of the 1v1s. Hopefully he wouldn't give her the Konohamaru treatment. After Neji versus Hinata, we have inarguably the greatest fight from the Chunin exams, Rock Lee versus Gaara. And this is another very interesting fight. I think we all know how Rock Lee versus Gaara pans out, right? Rock Lee opens the fight struggling to break through Gaara's absolute defense until eventually Might Guy says that he can drop his leg weights, at which point Rock Lee's speed becomes so much greater that he's able to break through Gaara's absolute defense and kick Gaara on the top of the head so hard he dabs. Rock Lee then opens to, I believe, the fourth gate so he can use his reverse flying lotus on Gaara, and as he spins Gaara's skull into the ground, it's revealed that Gaara broke the fall with a layer of sand, and the fact that he was wearing sand armor, at which point Rock Lee isn't able to escape Gaara's sand and he has his leg and his arm destroyed and he loses. But how would this battle pan out between an adult Rock Lee and an adult Gaara? And while I hate to say this with 4 more fights left, this is the most interesting fight as adults you could get from the Chunin exam. And because of that, it's also the hardest to say who would win. See, when it comes down to it, Gaara has way more impressive feats than Rock Lee. Because if we're to say that adult Rock Lee is the strongest version of Rock Lee, then the long list of feats that Rock Lee has as an adult or even in the 4th Great Shinobi World War is a grand total of 2 things. The first thing is during the 4th Great Shinobi World War when Rock Lee in the 5th gate kicks Madara in half. And while this is very impressive and one could use as an argument to say that Rock Lee speed blitzed Madara, he also during this moment has a version 1 Jinchuriki cloak, and I believe he's propelled by Might Guy. The second feat that Rock Lee has from 4th Great Shinobi World War on is in the last, when him and the rest of the Suicide Corps kick a meteor that's bound to destroy Konoha in half. But if I'm not mistaken here, Rock Lee has 5 or 6 other people helping him kick this meteor in half. Actually, I stand corrected. I'm looking at the scene right now. It looks to be at least 12 people, but it is impressive nonetheless. And now, while some people will try and tell you that Rock Lee doesn't have access to all 8 gates, that's wrong. By the time that Rock Lee became an adult with all the other Konoha 12, he mastered the first 7 gates. And when you master the 7th gate, you get the 8th gate. It's just you don't really practice the 8th gate. Now, it doesn't necessarily confirm to us that Rock Lee would be able to use things like Daytime Tiger or Morning Peacock, as those might be techniques that were specific to Might Guy, but we do know that Rock Lee has access to all 8 gates. Now, does that mean he's as strong as Might Guy was during the 4th Great Shinobi World War? Maybe, but it's important to note that Might Guy has an ability that Rock Lee doesn't, the ability to use ninjutsu. On top of that, Might Guy was raised in an era of war. And while Rock Lee did fight in the 4th Great Shinobi World War, I think we can all agree when we say he didn't do all that much. But sure, if we hypothetically highball Rock Lee as an adult to Might Guy in the 4th Great Shinobi World War, which it feels like a highball to me. The question becomes, could an 8th gate Rock Lee defeat an adult Gaara? So long as we're assuming that Rock Lee is literally willing to die to win a Chunin exam match, which goes against quite literally everything that Rock Lee stands for. As a core tenet of Rock Lee and Might Guy and the 8 gates as a whole is that you don't use the 8th gate unless you're protecting somebody you love, and we're talking about a Chunin exam match. But sure, let's throw literally all character out the window here and talk about them both at their possible strongest. Whether you like his haircut or not, Gaara in Boruto is the strongest version of Gaara we've ever seen, and he's had some pretty crucial fights. As in manga canon material, Gaara has gone toe-to-toe with the likes of Kinshiki and Fused Momoshiki, and while he didn't stand much of a chance against Fused Momoshiki, he stood a much better chance against him than all the other Kage not named Naruto, as Gaara was able to make a sand defense so powerful that it stopped Momoshiki's fist. At least that's what happened in the manga. In the anime, he's actually able to stop Momoshiki in his path with his sand. And while some say that that makes Gaara relative to Momoshiki, it's a bit of a stretch. But the fact that Gaara is able to make sand so powerful, it's able to give pause to a fused Momoshiki is crucial here. And while we've said oftentimes on this channel, considering Kinshiki an Otsutsuki level threat isn't the most accurate way to scale him. The combination of Chojuro, Koritsuchi, Darui, and Gaara was more than enough to outclass Kinshiki. In fact, I would go so far as to argue that Gaara would stand a fairly good chance in a 1v1 with Kinshiki, as the strongest of all non-named Naruto Kage. And this is backed up through a lot of Gaara's feats. In the 4th Great Shinobi World War, when Gaara was weaker than he was as an adult, he was able to play a crucial role in the stopping of one of Madara's meteors, an attack that would have killed the entirety of the 4th Division if he didn't stop. On top of this, Gaara was able to cover the entire sand village in a sand dome of sorts to stop the entire village from dying at the hands of a C3 bomb created by Deidara. And ridiculous sand feats like this are nothing new for Gaara, as Gaara in his battle against Kimimaro was able to cover an entire battlefield in sand and then use sand burial on the entire thing. On top of this, Gaara's Grand Sand Mausoleum was strong enough to be able to seal Urashiki for a matter of hours. And while Gaara wasn't relative to Urashiki, this is mostly because Gaara was weakened in his battle against Urashiki because Urashiki surprise attacked him, and used his fishing rod to draw out Gaara's chakra. But even if Gaara was full strength going into battle against Urashiki, I don't think he would stand a chance. So all this is to say that a myriad of Gaara's feats allow us to scale him somewhere in the region of Kinshiki. On top of that, Gaara as an adult was acknowledged by Momoshiki for his prowess in taijutsu, as Momoshiki went so far as to compare Gaara's taijutsu to Naruto's, who is inarguably the greatest taijutsu user not named Rock Lee. And so, if Gaara can bang with the likes of Kinshiki and Momoshiki in taijutsu, he now stands a much better chance in a taijutsu battle against Rock Lee. And if we're highballing 8 Gates Rock Lee to 8 Gates Might Guy, with 8 Gates Might Guy probably being somewhere around 75% of 10 Tails Madara, as well, Might Guy was able to land his Night Guy kick against Madara and almost kill him. He was only able to do that because Minato and Kakashi were fighting side by side with him. So the question becomes, where does a 75% 10 Tails Madara fall in the power scaling of Boruto's universe? And I think the answer is somewhere around Kinshiki, because I have no hesitancy in me when I say that 3 Rinnegan Madara was probably almost as strong as Kaguya, and I believe that Kaguya is almost as powerful, if not equally as powerful, as a fused Momoshiki. But since Might Guy was assisted in his battle against Madara and still didn't win, can't say that he's equal to 1 Rinnegan Madara. Though obviously Night Guy would kill anybody without Hashirama's regeneration factor. So who wins in this battle between adult Rock Lee and adult Gaara? Well, it's close. Probably about as close as it was when they were kids. But here's the thing about Gaara. He doesn't have the hubris of Jubidara. He's not going to stick around to be hit by Night Guy like Madara was. He would either use his sand to fly away from the kick or try to stop it. And since we've seen that adult Gaara's sand is able to deflect attacks from a fused Momoshiki, he might actually be able to stop it. All in all, while I think it's close, I do believe that an adult Gaara still ekes out a victory over adult Rock Lee. Because not only has Gaara's sand gotten much more powerful in its defense, but his control and his volume has massively increased. Not to mention his taijutsu is now top 5 in the universe. So if it comes down to fisticuffs, he can still carry himself. But it's close. I wouldn't blame you for saying Rock Lee. Now after that incredibly important and super interesting fight, we have Choji versus Dosu. You know, the guy with the sound creating gauntlets on his forearms that challenges Gaara to a fight that immediately leads to his squishing? Yeah, I lied earlier when I said that Shikamaru versus Kin was the shortest fight. This is actually the shortest fight, because the entirety of this fight is boiled down to Choji turning into a human bullet tank, missing, getting stuck in the wall, Dosu taking a sound gauntlet, punching Choji with it, and ending the fight. Though, this is as strong as Dosu ever gets. And Choji eventually gets so strong that he's able to turn himself into the size of a mountain as fast as lightning. That is straight out of the data book, meaning that Choji can undergo his transformation to become the size of a mountain in massively hypersonic speed. And when you combine that with his butterfly technique that allows him to burn all of the fat on his body and turn it into chakra, which is so dense that it flies out of his back and creates wings that allow him at the size of a mountain to fly, then yeah, you get a guy who's able to go toe-to-toe with the likes of the Ghetto statue, also known as the Husk of the Ten Tails. And while sure, technically Choji's dad, Chozo, is there to help him in the battle against the Ghetto statue, it's not Chozo, it's Choza. The fact that Choji was in that fight, even for a little bit, says that he's gotten way stronger. And in Boruto, it's been confirmed that Choji is now the physically strongest person in all of Konoha. So yeah, he's beaten Sound Gauntlet Boy. He's just stomping him until he's pavement. And speaking of stomping, the next fight on our list is Naruto versus Neji, which is a really good fight, because Naruto wasn't an adult. Now in this fight, obviously Naruto was upset with Neji about how he treated Hinata in their fight, and from a character development standpoint, this is one of the most important moments in all of Naruto, OG or Shippuden, as this fight was supposed to set the thematic standard that you are more than the circumstance of your birth, that hard work truly overcomes all, and that point is supposed to be cemented when Naruto comes out victorious over the childhood genius Neji. However, somewhat ironically, if these two were to fight as adults, I mean, Neji died at 16, so we'd have to get him right before Obito struck him down, the opposite point would become incredibly apparent. That Naruto, who was born the child of Minato and Kushina, two of the strongest people that ever lived inside of Konoha, and was graced with the entirety of the strongest tailed beast in existence, while also being the reincarnation of a literal god in Asura, slowly but surely pulls off Neji's arms and legs and says, haha, can't poke me anymore now, can you? The point that you are more than the circumstance of your birth would very quickly be proven wrong. Because as Nugget Neji laid there bleeding out thinking about his life as a member of the side branch family, he would realize, oh, it never mattered if you were a member of the side branch family or the main branch family. So long as you're not the reincarnation of a god with the most powerful parent duo the world has ever known and the wielder of the strongest force on earth, the circumstance of your birth doesn't matter at all. But that fight still wouldn't be nearly as ugly as the next entry on our list, because the next entry on our list is Temari versus Shikamaru. This would be a domestic affair. But since the two of them weren't dating during this fight, it was just foreplay. Foreplay that Shikamaru was the victor of. See, for the entirety of this battle, it appears as though Shikamaru was on the defensive, as Temari uses her wind release and her master strategic mind to slowly but surely force Shikamaru into a worse and worse situation. However, over time it's revealed that Shikamaru only appeared to be on the defensive because he was trying to get Temari into a position where he could snag her shadow, which he manages to do, which effectively means that Shikamaru wins. However, the second that he grabs her shadow, he realizes he's low on chakra, and so he decides to forfeit the match, but everybody knows he was the real winner. Now this fight, outside of the fact that it would be over Shikadai's custody, would also be incredibly entertaining, because while the two of these characters were very close in strength as children, they're now really close in strength as adults, too. See, like I've already established, I believe that the strongest version of Shikamaru we ever got was during the 4th Great Shinobi World War. After the 4th Great Shinobi World War, he stepped into the world of politics. He's really lost his touch as a ninja. And if you haven't read his light novels, you wouldn't know that. But him losing his touch as a ninja isn't the worst thing ever. He's an analytical genius mind who shouldn't be risked on the battlefield. Now, the strongest version of Temari is also kind of up in the air, because while Shikamaru and Temari didn't hook up until about 3 years after the 4th Great Shinobi World War, like everybody else, the second that she, like every other woman in the Boruto universe, decided to have a kid, she kind of took a step back as a ninja. So it's probably safest to assume that the strongest version of Temari we ever got was in the last, before she had Shikadai. So could Shikamaru in the 4th Great Shinobi World War beat the last Temari? It's hard to say. See, Shikamaru's feats in the 4th Great Shinobi World War are largely analytical. Pretty much the only important fight that Shikamaru was involved in the 4th Great Shinobi World War is Team 10 versus Edo Tensei Asuma. Even that's not all that impressive. Asuma, well, he was one of the 12 pillars of the Land of Fire, and therefore deemed to be one of the strongest ninjas within the confines of the Land of Fire, and therefore worthy of protecting the daimyo, doesn't necessarily have any feats that make us go, wow, he was really strong. He stood no chance against the likes of Kisame, Itachi, or even Hidan. And while obviously knowing Hidan's abilities are a big plus when fighting Hidan, losing to the weakest member of the Akatsuki is not a great look. So while sure, Team 10 was able to defeat Edo Tensei Asuma, and a large part of that was due to Shikamaru, that's not all that impressive. And pretty much the most impressive things that we ever see from Shikamaru is defeating Hidan in a 1v1, though he had a ton of prep time in previous knowledge of Hidan's abilities, which when you know are basically a non-factor. And through the usage of a shadow technique, he's done things like being able to hold Hidan down, pick up Choji in his human tank bullet form, and a couple of other somewhat impressive things. So does that relatively meager amount of power scale to Temari, somebody who's able to cut down entire forests with her wind release and land a hit against Edo Tensei Madara? It's genuinely hard to say, but when you consider the fact that adult Temari can fly using her fan, and has a myriad of long-range jutsus that Shikamaru probably wouldn't be able to counter, like her sickle weasel, I'd say I actually trust Temari in this fight more than I trust Shikamaru, especially if we're considering the fact that they both know each other's abilities. Temari would know to avoid Shikamaru's shadow and therefore keep a distance from him, which she can do. And so long as she can do that, Shikamaru doesn't have a ton of options, because so long as you stay off the ground, shadows can't nab you. Not to mention, to somebody in a very long-term relationship with a woman, you can't win in a fight against them. So while neither of them really have any scalable feats, I like Temari's kit more in this battle than I like Shikamaru's. But enough about fights that were even when they were kids and will be even when they're adults, because the last fight we need to talk about is Sasuke versus Gaara. If we're being fully real with ourselves, if Gaara didn't lose his head and turn into Shukaku, Gaara would have won this fight, and rather handily. And in fact, that's put on rather large display when Sasuke goes to battle against the semi-transformed Gaara and gets pinned to a tree. See, because while Sasuke was able to mimic Rock Lee's speed and therefore get through Gaara's absolute defense, and then when Gaara decided to shell up in a sand bubble that Sasuke was able to cut through using Chidori, all he really managed to do was make Gaara bleed. And if Gaara wasn't such a little psychopath back then, that wouldn't have been the end of the fight. Not to mention that literally everything we saw from Gaara in the Sasuke retrieval arc showed that he wasn't even using half of his power. Because while one, yes, he could still turn into Shukaku, though that wasn't really a move he could control, but two, based on what we saw in his battle against Kimimaro, if he wanted to, he could have just covered the entire arena in sand and just sand burialed. So how does this fight go if the two of them are adults? Well, let me tell you right now, the gap between adult Gaara and adult Sasuke isn't as large as you think it is. I mean, it's not small. See, earlier we established the fact that I believe that adult Gaara would stand a fairly good chance in a 1v1 against Kinshiki, which means that I believe that adult Gaara scales to the lowest level of Otsutsuki level. So Kinshiki, Jubito, Nagato, possibly Edo Itachi. He is very strong as an adult. He has battled against 3 Otsutsukis to relatively good effect. And while he's losing in most of these fights, he's doing a lot better job than all of the other Kage or anybody else involved in these fights. Not to mention, if you've read Gaara Hiden, you'll know that after the conclusion of Naruto during the blank period, Gaara began to allow himself to use his father's Kekkei Genkai, his magnet release. However, since sand isn't magnetic, Gaara actually uses this magnet release to increase the chakra density of his sand, which is why he's able to make it so hard that Momoshiki in his fused form can't shatter it. And since adult Sasuke's AP is somewhere probably in the fused Momoshiki area, this means that Gaara would presumably be able to stop attacks from Sasuke with his sand. And since he controls sand, which is a physical thing with chakra, it can't be absorbed by things like a Rinnegan Palm or a Karma Mark, so Sasuke wouldn't be able to absorb his sand. However, unfortunately, even though Gaara still got that absolute defense stopped working during the Chunin exams in terms of speed, and Sasuke is now much faster than he used to be. So while Sasuke wouldn't be able to kill Gaara immediately, Sasuke would be able to defeat Gaara with relative ease. As we saw during the 4th Great Shinobi Worlds War, that Gaara's Grand Sand Mausoleum wasn't even enough to seal Edo Tensei Madara, and that would kind of be Gaara's best bet. And since Sasuke scales to at least Urashiki and probably beyond, Gaara being unable to battle against Urashiki doesn't bode so well for him in a battle against Sasuke. But it's closer than a lot of people would say, and for that, we gotta give Gaara at least a little bit of credit. And with that, that's all 13 Chunin exam battles redone as adults. Out of all of these fights, which would you guys want to see the most? Tell me in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. This is why we usually cap ranked and explained videos at 10 entries. Out.